Well, well.
Look who was right the entire time. Y'all were hating on me for saying this season was going to be a letdown back in my first video, but I should have known that all I had to do was let time prove me right. In all seriousness, as vindicated as I feel watching the fandom slowly recognize that Arcane did indeed fall off, I derive no pleasure from being correct. I want to remind you guys that I really am a huge fan of this show. I don't think any animated show has impacted my artistic journey this deeply since Avatar, and I cannot overstate how gutted I am to see it end like this. It's extremely obvious to me that the writers just lost interest in the story they were telling, and I wrote this part before Christian Link came out and literally admitted as much. Nothing makes my blood curdle faster in my veins than a writer who doesn't care about the story they're trying to tell. I said in my first video that I didn't care about the politics or economics that went into the downfall of Arcane, and that remains true. The bottom line is that corporate greed killed one of the best cartoons of the decade, and that is a crime that I, as a writer and artist, can never forgive. I won't act like there was nothing good about this season. In order for my criticism to actually mean anything, I have to give credit where credit is absolutely due. Starting with Arcane's most obvious strength, the art remains some of the most nuanced, detailed, and expressive I've seen in animation in a long time. Maybe ever. The only other media that come to mind are the Spider-Verse films, which, like Arcane, were similarly stunning for their stylistic experimentation and how they took full advantage of the animated medium to push the limits of their visuals. Everything from the backgrounds to the character rigs to the shot composition is lovingly and artfully crafted, and the artists at Fortiche have my eternal gratitude for carrying the show even after the writers gave up on it. This scene alone? I gasped out loud. I think about it every day. I can only dream of achieving this level of cognitive dissonance in my own work. 10 out of fucking 10. So the art goes without saying. Another thing that goes without saying is this epic instant karma. It is so incredibly epic of Mel to put that shield around Maddie so that no matter what, the bullet would fly back at her. I have a lot to say about Maddie as a character later on, but for now, let's just enjoy Stigma's great comeuppance. Lesbians, how are we feeling tonight? Let's go! I'm just gonna say here, I'm a bottom vi truther, but I knew she could only ever top if it was framed as an act of service. Okay, but in all seriousness, I am so phenomenally grateful for this scene. Ignoring all of the awkward implications of fucking in the prison cell your suicidal sister was just kept in for days, I really do feel like this is the one sex scene in any media that I can confidently say was necessary. Once again, referring back to my video on Act 1, queer media is rife with workarounds for any kind of concrete confirmation saying, yes, these characters are gay and they're in love, and here's the irrefutable proof. And while I previously mentioned being a fan of how this forces writers to show love in more nuanced ways, it also remains true that this is a product of the widespread homophobic zeitgeist. There is a massive deficit of queer sex in popular media, so getting a scene like this at all, much less one so lovingly tended, is a huge win for the queer community. Now we just need to wait on the leaks for the extended French cut. Speaking of wins for the LGBTs... Now, I think this show gets a bit of a barrier gaze pass since the only remaining duo by the end of the show is Caitlyn and Vi, but either way, I can't act like I don't enjoy the soulmates energy of it all.
In all timelines, in all possibilities, only you can show me this.
No one will ever believe that I called Victor being the mage that saved Jace, but know that it's true. I have to admit I'm not a huge Javik fan. Not because I dislike the ship, I just was never especially interested in it. Don't get me wrong, they're very obviously into each other. Oh, you're my partner. Oh, I had sex with Mel, but I thought of Victor the whole time. Oh, I'm emotionless, but the one thing I can't give up on is the blanket representing Jace's final act of love to me. Like, get over yourselves. Y'all ain't fooling anybody. That said, this is another one of those instances where no one ever kisses or says I love you, but they don't have to because their actions and their dedication to each other say everything we need to hear. That said, it is absolutely homophobic for the writers to be complaining about a romantic interpretation of these two. Dorian is Reading on TikTok made a great video on the topic that I'll link below about the inherent homophobia in shaming queer interpretations of same-sex relationships. The gist of it is that there is no shortage of platonic relationships between men and media, so complaining about queer interpretations is a manifestation of one's internal discomfort with the existence of queerness at all. People only ask, why does everything have to be gay because queerness offends them, consciously or not? The real question is, why does everything have to be straight? Well, the answer is easy. Because if queerness exists, that means there will always be the question of whether someone is queer or not, and many straight people cannot handle that doubt reflected back on themselves. Anyways, I digress. The point is that Victor and Jace got their true doomed yaoi ending, and I think I liked it. The main takeaway here is that internalized ableism can destroy the world, and only true gay love can save it. Or something. Also, the manifestation of Victor's remaining humanity saying he wouldn't miss her as she dissolves, priceless.
I will miss our talks.
No, you won't.
This might be a controversial take, but I actually love that the Doctor got his happy ending. His entire existence was dedicated to doing unspeakable things in the name of love, and he was integral to the machinations of the plot. Singed is a side character that represents the heart of Arcane's story, and I think giving him any other kind of ending would have risked the show's thematic integrity, and with the fragile remaining legs said integrity was already wobbling on, I fear that would have toppled the whole house of cards. Where other characters' narratives were muddled by the sheer amount of events that Season 2 had to push through, Singed managed to show up, do what he came to do, and quietly retire to his happy ending. From start to finish, he did not give a fuck what happened to anyone else as long as he saved his daughter, and because he never got wrapped up in anyone else's bullshit, he got what he wanted. It's so unfair. It's so perfect. He is so selfish, but every single action he takes is directly tied to his motivation, and for that reason, I think he might actually be the only character that the writers never lost sight of. Episode 7 might be my favorite episode out of the entirety of Arcane, and that's not really a good thing. As much as I enjoyed it as a viewer, in the context of the entire show, it's an extremely heavy diversion from the larger story that ends up warping the focus of the finale to the point that I came out the other end of the show more invested in Echo and Jinx than I was in any other character relationship. This episode reshaped the chemical composition of my brain. I wasn't really big on Time Bomb before because even though their relationship was touched on in season 1, it didn't really give us a ton of information about what they meant to each other beyond being childhood friends. Episode 7 completely refurbished that entire interpretation. Seeing what they could have meant to each other in a world where they aren't pitted against each other was viscerally bittersweet, and my other criticisms aside, I can appreciate how this alternate world showed Echo that there is a good version of Jinx out there and how that was necessary not just for the plot, but for Echo's character growth as well. Echo's only notable flaw in the entire show was how he had given up on Jinx. Where Vi's fatal flaw was that she couldn't stop seeing the good in people, Echo's mistake that he was all too ready to see the bad. This episode was the catalyst that cracked open the chink in his emotional armor that we caught a glimpse of in the first season, and even though I would have preferred to see this character growth handled more gradually, I still loved watching Echo reopen his heart in real time. Biggest critique is that Milo needs to shave that fucking animal off his face. Vander and Silco was an insane win. I love the family photo of them with Powder, but I'm kind of bummed that Milo and Clagger aren't there. Whatever. It's kind of an insane take that Vi dying would have saved the universe. Okay, don't start. I know that wasn't the point. I know the real game changer was that Powder never got a hold of the Hextech marbles and that that's what changed everything, but I actually think that detail also misses the point. This is one of the places where I feel like the show lost its focus. Season 1's conflict was firmly rooted in classism. Every issue, whether it was the brewing war between cities or the interpersonal problems that arose between characters, came back to the same common denominator. Vi and crew were only stealing from Piltover in the first place because Jace's apartment possessed an abundance of wealth that people from the Undercity could only dream of. It wasn't the Hex tech that oppressed the Undercity. It was how the technology was used to benefit the wealthy and suppress the poor that perpetuated the conflict of the story. Instead of reaffirming this, the way the scene plays out makes it look like Powder getting a hold of the marbles is what doomed the timeline. I don't even think that interpretation is the fault of poor reader comprehension, because the final battle of the show centers not around overcoming class disparity, but on destroying Hex tech. I feel like in order to tie this timeline effectively into the commentary on classism, I have to reach for a ton of vague connections about how Vi dying might have been a wake-up call for Piltover, about how desperate conditions in the Undercity are, and how banning Hextech prevented the growing divide between Piltover and Zon, but I'm not feeling that generous. My major takeaway from this universe is that Hextech was the root of evil all along, not how the wealthy used it to suppress the poor, and that reframes the entire story in a way that sounds a lot like there were bad people on both sides. Which, sure, Jinx fucked up. Hurting people is bad, etc., but Hextech didn't create Jinx. Piltover did. And Season 2 seriously forgot that. Wait, actually, I'm not done. What do you mean life is so much better for everyone and all we had to do was get rid of the biggest advocate for a Zon uprising? Like, again, I get the point was that Hextech never took off, but the catalyst was still Vi dying. Vi, who fought the hardest because she was scared and wanted a better life for her family. I don't know, it just ends up feeling like there's something being said in there about how utopia equals no family and no class consciousness, which in a story where season 1 was entirely about the importance of family and class consciousness really feels like a gross redirection. This segment was originally going to be about how much I liked this episode, but I can't really say more than it made me happy to see what could have been. This episode was pretty fan servicey, which I don't mind because I still enjoyed it a lot and because it gave Echo some important development. The real issue I had with this episode was how it unbalanced the rest of the show. The AU episode was brutal timing, giving us that much time to spend with Echo and sort of Jinx got us really invested in them for an entire third of the act right before shoving us back into the larger story, which didn't end with the two of them as that big of a feature. We spend 40 minutes investing in everything they could have meant to each other, then turn around and skip the meat of their reconciliation right to them flying in on a hot air balloon. What's the timeline here? How much time has passed between when Echo stops her from killing herself and the moment they pull up to the final battle? It's impossible to tell. The other side of this episode is taken up by Jace and his journey across the wasteland. This at least provided some balance because of how it tied into the final conflict between him and Victor, but I want to point out here that Jace and Victor were never our primary main characters. This was Vi and Jinx's story. Hell, that's why it's their faces on the record for almost every episode intro. But even though so much of this episode focuses on Echo and Powder, we don't come away having spent any time with our Jinx in a way that matters. To say nothing about Vi, who was fucking dead. We barely spend any time with Vi and Jinx together in the final 2 episodes, and half of that time is just Jinx sacrificing herself. Then we speedrun to some unmeasurable time skip in which Vi has had enough time to grieve her sister to be chilling with Caitlyn. As much as I loved the AU episode, I ended up caring almost not at all about Caitlyn and Vi getting their happy ending because of it. How do you fumble your own story that badly? My favorite characters in season 1 meant almost nothing to me by the end of the show because I was entirely distracted by the emotional gut punch of the Time Bomb alternate universe. I should not walk away from the Caitlyn and Vi sex scene thinking about how Jinx is going to turn her life around with Echo's help. And I definitely shouldn't just be blueballed into never getting that answer because the writers had to cut that extremely significant conversation. The missing conversation between Jinx and Echo is just one of many gaping holes left by the hasty cuts made to the final episode. I understand the writers were hoping for a longer finale, but on top of condensing 3 seasons worth of plot lines into a single season, making obvious cuts to the story they had left on top of that is just sloppy. We have to learn in an interview with the writers after the fact that Echo confided in Jinx about the alternate universe, information that completely reframes Jinx's final words to Vi.
Always with you, sis.
There were a lot of missing things that bothered me, but none of them left such a yawning black hole as whatever conversation they cut between Jinx and Echo. Speaking of missing conversations, we're missing some major emotional legwork between Caitlyn and Vi. They never talk things over, and this
She oinked poison in your ear and you just ate it. I know!
doesn't count. How are we just glossing over Caitlyn becoming everything that Vi is scared of and confirming every fear she's ever had about how people in power see her as subhuman? Are we really acting like Caitlyn making a couple of good choices on the back end is enough to make up for spearheading an entire Nazi Germany subplot? Like, the sex scene was very epic and I'm grateful for it, but like, that is not a substitute for meaningful reconciliation. We are missing some serious relationship development between here and here. Again, you can tell the writers just got bored of their own characters. I didn't even need it in writing, but Christian Link gave it to us signed and notarized anyway.
I've read that criticism. It is true that Season 2 had other characters occupy more screen time. As writers, we were interested in these characters. I really don't know what else to say.
Well, Christian, there's nothing to say.
You blew it!
The fact of the matter is that you proudly admitted that you, in the privileged position to run one of the most beautiful shows of the decade, stopped giving a shit about your queer female leads, which, as a man, is a really bad look for you. God, I can't even get into that. I might actually explode. I'm so pissed about the lack of Savika. Beautiful butch love of my life, I'm sorry that they did this to you. You meant everything to me and they swept your entire character into the gutter. Savika was not just another side character. She'd been in this show since day fucking 1 and somehow Loris of all people gets more dialogue than she does in the entire final act. Why would the writers build up the Savika and Jinx bond just to turn around and give us nothing? She never saw her or Isha again after episode 4, which is actually so criminal to me. She never learned what happened to Isha. Hell, we don't even get to know if she learned what happened to Jinx. She just ends up in the council, which by the way doesn't strike me as a particularly equitable turnout for Zahn. Sis was not made to head the politics. That girl is gonna hate that shit. It's brutal out here. I don't know how they did it, but somehow Vander dying again actually did end up being more relevant than Isha dying. This confirms to me that Isha was nothing more than a plot device brought in to set Jinx on the path to recovery, then die and never get mentioned again. She existed to further the plot. Her death didn't accomplish anything except apparently causing enough confusion for Vi, Caitlyn, Jinx, and Jace to escape the battle with Noxus because Vander turned out to be fine. I don't know how the power of 3 hex orbs doesn't kill him, but Jinx's single bomb does, but whatever. The fact remains that Isha died for nothing, except actually what she really died for is to send Jinx into a suicidal despair that has her turning herself into Caitlyn just so Caitlyn can let Vi let her out, and then they can smash while Jinx is off trying to kill herself 4 or 5 times before Echo finally talks her down and convinces her to join the final battle in a conversation off screen. My point is that Isha died to further the plot and then never came up again, and that the ensuing speedrun of Jinx changing sides was almost insane enough to rival Caitlyn's turnaround at the end of Act 2. No meaningful interactions between Caitlyn and Jace this season, other than that one time someone else had to remind him about her mom dying, which is a huge drop-off from how important they were to each other in Season 1. No Echo and Vi either, who were not only evidently quite important to each other, but who also presented a foil for each other when it came to handling Jinx. The last time Vi saw him was on the bridge when Jinx blew the two of them up, and now, without any acknowledgement of that or their independent growth regarding Jinx and the greater conflict, they get a 5-second team up on Echo's hoverboard and then never see each other again. Also, how does Echo even know what the fuck is going on? Why is he over here getting Jinx to team up with Piltover against Noxus? How does he know who they're fighting? He doesn't even know who Victor is, much less why they need to stop him. He missed out on all this stuff while he was busy frolicking around in a different timeline. I guess he knows something went wrong with the Hex Core, but there's a pretty significant jump from that to all-out war. I can't believe they killed the Lorax. We didn't even get to see if they saved the tree. I didn't realize it was up for debate whether Jinx survived. Honestly, I thought it was pretty obvious with Caitlyn holding the bomb and checking out the blueprints for an escape route and then going back and realizing that the ship that flies away in the final shot is the exact shot from the scene where Powder says she's going to ride one someday. I feel like it's pretty clear she's alive. But I actually don't even care whether Jinx is alive or not because the pit in my soul is empty just the same. If she's dead, she's removed from the narrative. If she's alive, she's still removing herself from the narrative. She's no longer relevant to the people she loved, which in a way is its own kind of death, and I honestly wanted better for her. That plus the time skip to Vi at a point where she's coping relatively well with the loss of her sister just kind of felt like the writers put a bow on a gift they hadn't finished wrapping and called it a day.
It took all of 3 ducks to patch you up.
I need them to stop forcing Loras into this caretaker father archetype because he literally showed up, gave us nothing, then died, and I didn't feel a damn thing about it. You could have removed him, Maddie, and the Fishman from the show completely and nothing would have changed. Actually, the show would have been better off for it because then we wouldn't have wasted valuable time trying to shoehorn them into a narrative that didn't need them. And that includes Maddie especially, because what in the ever-loving, oh Anna, if only there was someone who loved you, was that?
I did appreciate your warmth.
You're the murderer! I knew it! I knew it! You're such a bitch! You're such a fucking bitch!
Okay, walk with me for a second. So Maddie is some kind of sleeper agent planted by Mbessa in the event that things go tits up with Piltover and Caitlyn betrays her. That much on the surface I can follow, but what did it actually achieve to have Maddie as the little snake in Caitlyn's ear? Mbessa was so blindsided by Caitlyn's betrayal that clearly having Maddie constantly doing temperature checks didn't actually do anything. If her entire existence was just set up for that little gotcha moment in the middle of the final battle, I honestly could have done without her because again, we have so many other characters and plot lines to get through in this final season, and the writers should have focused on cutting the fat so we could get to the meat of the narrative instead of trying to make things complex for the sake of grandeur. I don't really know where Jace was getting all this stuff to keep a fire going and build himself a brace for his leg, but honestly, that's one of my lesser complaints at this point. My suspension of disbelief has had quite enough exercise to be able to handle that. Mel mastering her magic overnight, on the other hand, is kind of an insane turnaround. Somehow, in the span of 0 screen time dedicated to figuring out her powers, Mel went from learning she was a mage to mastering the nuances of fast-paced, high-stakes magic activation in the heat of battle. She must have done some insane training off-screen because there's no way that she managed to do shit like this and then break into the Shapeshifter's magical rose prison to kill her too for some reason. I'm going to be honest, the Black Rose subplot was really difficult for me to follow. Like, yeah, okay, the point was probably that even though Mbessa fucked up real bad, Mel's family is still more important to her than pointing fingers, but again, this whole thing felt like the writers got bored of Mel and just needed to get her powered up for the final battle. Mel wasn't a personal favorite of mine or anything back in season 1, but I wouldn't have been caught dead insulting her as a character. She was artfully crafted to be simultaneously the woman commanding the room and the woman in way over her head. She wanted prosperity for her people and opposed war, and her upbringing in Noxus and subsequent position of power in Piltover gave her a unique perspective that managed to make her a catalyst for war with Zahn, even as she sought a peaceful resolution. Her character was a delicate balance of doing what she believed was right while constantly running up against the unavoidable pitfalls that come with making decisions on behalf of the underprivileged while she herself enjoyed untouchable status. And then in season 2, she became this helpless, uncertain person who stood at the table looking pitiful until Caitlyn showed up to take up the mantle, and then she got kidnapped, which nobody really noticed, and came back with magical powers, lost everyone she ever loved, and shipped out on the next fleet to Noxus. So what was her character arc again? When the conflict stopped being about Piltover and Zaun and started being about Piltover and Noxus, somehow the character with a foot in both worlds became the least relevant, and it's because Mel's character was designed to fit a particular role in a story about class conflict. Mel had seen the horrors of war and wanted to avoid it at all costs, but because she lived in Piltover, she couldn't see that a silent war had been ongoing in the Undercity for years. People were dying, just not the ones she saw in her daily life. When Jinx bombed the council and Mel survived thanks to her magic, this was going to be Mel's chance to come to terms with her own complicity and realize that war is still war even if you don't have to see it. We could have had tension between her and Caitlyn as Caitlyn took her subsequent turn from Zaunite sympathizer to Piltover supremacist, but instead Mel was plucked from the narrative entirely because season 2 decided, actually, we don't want to be about class war anymore. The only way for everyone to be friends is to unite against a common enemy, so we're just going to ignore the years of oppression we worked so hard to establish as our main focal point back in season 1 and make everything about forgiving those who hurt you. Oops, sorry, drop that. Here, let's move on. Victor is another character that felt unrecognizable from the first season, and I know it's because he died and turned into a hex girl or whatever, but going from
There is always a choice.
to
Choice is false.
is the kind of 180 you don't get in the span of one season. And yeah, it does kind of bug me that the guy from Zaun who constantly advocated against building weapons that could be used against Zaun and wanted to use Hextech to improve the lives of people in Zaun became the main villain instead of the institution of Piltover, which never ended up acknowledging what it did to Zaun. This is really where the story lost sight of itself. Our main villain ends up being the Zaunite who wanted world peace. The narrative tells us there is no room for Jinx, a product of Piltover's oppression, and that the only way for the violence to end is for Jinx to take responsibility and break the cycle by walking away from a fight that she was born into. Because she's the problem.
I think the cycle only ends when you find the will to walk away.
Vi's happy ending is getting together with the apparently reformed fascist dictator who never had to take accountability for her actions. And listen, I don't actually care if Vi wants to date the apparently reformed fascist dictator. Like, shout out girl, you deserve to be loved. But getting there after the narrative forgot about its own themes surrounding classism made it feel almost like part of the reason they stopped engaging with those themes was so that Vi and Caitlyn could get back together without having to do any significant on-screen emotional legwork. Because, like, imagine if Zaun and Piltover were about to go to war with each other instead of Noxus. Where would the sex scene go? I rest my case. So yeah, Arcane completely lost track of every social commentary it established in season 1, and I really can't figure out why they would do that, especially if they had to condense things down to 2 seasons. Why would the writers gloss over the conflicts they established in season 1 just to replace it with an undercooked coming together against a greater evil trope? I have to assume that it really is just a matter of the writers trying to cram 4 seasons of the story into one, because I can see where, given the appropriate amount of room to expand on its events, the narrative might have been able to graduate from a tale of 2 cities into how those cities engage with the rest of the world, but 1 season was not nearly enough. I said it in my first video and I'll say it again. If you no longer have the room to tell your story in its planned 5-season extravagance, then it's time to focus on the story you can tell with the room you have left. Arcane started out as a story about family and class disparity, and I don't feel as if I come away from the end of the show having gained any meaningful perspective on either of those 2 things. Vi and Jinx don't get to be together in any universe. Vander is dead. Isha was a plot device. Mel has nobody left. Echo has nobody left. Savika got to play Auntie for like a day and then was never spoken of again. What exactly is the takeaway here? Season 1 was all about parents and how they will do anything for their daughters, and then when season 2 came around and it was time for the daughters to take up the mantle, nobody had any family left. Instead of holding Piltover accountable for oppressing Zaun for decades, Mbessa swoops in and makes everything about Noxus. I just feel like I'm not even watching the same show at this point. It's very rare that a show touches me as deeply as Arcane did with its first season, and I trusted the team that handled season 1 with such care to maintain that level of quality through the end. The tonal shift between seasons was crazy. The characters were unrecognizable to me. Season 1 set us up for a slow burn that wasn't followed up on, and it seems we have capitalism to blame. I didn't want to move on to another story in the League of Legends universe at the cost of this one. I wanted this story to be told in full and given the time to be the cinematic masterpiece that the writers had obviously planned. I don't care if it was money or COVID or Netflix or what, but I think I would have genuinely rather they'd cut off after a full season 2 than compress the story down to fit. I end up feeling like they wasted this story, which can never be retroactively fixed. I come away feeling empty not because a show I love has ended, but because I could see the vision of the show it wanted to be back in season 1, and season 2 did not give us that show. I feel like I am watching a work of art betrayed by money. As an artist and writer myself, it makes me feel helpless, like it's not worth writing anything great at all if the corporate powers powers that be will cut it because it doesn't make the kind of money they want. Will there ever be an opportunity to tell the kind of story that the first season promised us? I do not know. But if Arcane couldn't do it, I'm not feeling especially hopeful for the rest of us. Well, that one was a bit of a downer. I really did try to go in optimistically with Acts 2 and 3, but the more I sat with everything, the more I realized how discontent I was. Anyways, you guys know the drill by now. Thanks for sticking to the end, and don't forget to smash that subscribe. Now we just need to wait on the leaks for the leaks for the extended French cut. Damn, that was hard to say.